Hey, what is up? Welcome to this episode of the Entrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast. As always, I'm your host, Brian Lofermento, and I am so very excited about not only today's guest, but the conversation that we're going to have, because there are so many places that I want to go with today's entrepreneur, because this is someone who not only loves all the things that he does for work, his subject matter expertise, but it's so clear to me that this is someone who also so deeply loves entrepreneurship, the entrepreneurial mindset, masterminds, partnerships, collaboration. I'm so excited. So let me introduce you to today's guest. His name is Nicholas Cook. Nicholas likes to find meaningful projects and communities to collaborate with. He's a blogger, a teacher, a real estate investor, and he's the founder of Money 101 Academy. After graduating from college, Nicholas began work as a financial advisor and paraplanner for several years, where he helped manage client assets through investing in stocks, bonds, mutual funds, and ETFs. He mostly worked with a smaller firm where he helped manage over $40 million in clients' assets. Then, around 2012, Nicholas got into working in schools, and the classes he has taught include personal finance, English, literature, theology, investing, and algebra. He has experience making money online and developing businesses in various ways, including through web design, YouTube. I know that he has gotten into some awesome YouTube shorts in recent years, e-commerce, affiliate marketing, and email marketing. And as the founder of Money 101 Academy, that's where he creates personal finance and business educational content, and the Money 101 Academy membership to help people on the road to financial freedom. Outside of all this work stuff, he also invests himself in real estate, and he enjoys blogging about life, business, and creativity. This is going to be a fun one. I'm not going to say anything else. I want to dive straight into my interview with Nicholas Cook. All right, Nicholas, I am so very excited that you're here with us today. First things first, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Brian. Good to see you.
Heck yes, there's so many topics. I already know time's going to fly by with you today, but let's kick things off. Take us beyond the bio. Who's Nicholas? How'd you start doing all these cool things?
Yeah, I think just to segue off what you were saying, my first career was working as a financial advisor. And a quick little story, when I was in college, just probably like a lot of people in college, you're like, I don't know what the heck I'm supposed to do for the rest of my life. And I remember having a conversation with a business teacher, and it might have been the best thing I learned in my experience in college. And he kind of became somewhat of a mentor. We would have little side conversations here and there. And what he told me, and he came from the corporate world and then got into education, like after having a career working for like Anheuser-Busch. And he told me that probably the best thing you can do after college is to get a sales job. At the time, I was like, didn't really have the best like perception of salespeople, but working as a financial advisor, or if you want to have any business, sales, you need sales to exist. So looking back, that was some really wise advice as I segued into that first career as a financial advisor. So that's kind of where things got started. And then, you kind of, in the bio, you kind of gave where things went from there. I took a little bit of a detour after that. I had been thinking about some full-time ministry. And so I actually was in a seminary for a few years, even though business was going well and my business was slowly growing as a financial advisor. And then I got into education after I left that. And then a few years ago, I got back into business stuff. We can kind of get into that more as we keep going. But, the Money 101 Academy stuff, and there's some other ventures I've done as well along the way. So that's kind of the short story.
Yeah, I love that, Nicholas. Well, I'm going to jump in with you directly where I think it's important for all of us to jump in, and that is you've made a career out of talking about money, and way too many people avoid talking about money. So, Nicholas, to really jump into the fun stuff, the first, I guess I'm going to kind of load this question up for you, and that is, why don't we talk about money more? And then when you've started talking about money with people, because this is fun, because we can't avoid this topic as entrepreneurs, but we also can't avoid this topic in life. When you start having those conversations, what are those mental or emotional barriers that you find most people run into?
Yeah, so I mean, I've seen this from both the business world side and from the education side. Talking about money in the classroom is one thing, and maybe we could get into that. But when you're in the real world and you're talking with people, I mean, if you want to, yeah, there was so many different things about money. Some people, they just wanted help saving for retirement. Some people were at a place where they needed to get on a budget. So, yeah, I mean, it's definitely something. If you want to live in, at least in the United States, you need to have some type of education and money. So, yeah, that's what I would say.
Yeah, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit here, Nicholas, because it's one of the hardest lessons that I had to learn as an entrepreneur. I'm 17 years into my entrepreneurial journey, and I've heard that cliche of cash is king. I've heard it a million times. I went to business school. I majored in economics and finance, so of course I've heard it, but I don't think I fully understood what it meant from a business perspective, from an entrepreneur's perspective, until of course I was limited in my business growth by cash flow. Talk to us about that phrase, cash is king, because obviously it has merit, but I also would argue that it's been diluted simply because it is a cliche at this point.
Yeah, I mean, that's a term I've probably started to hear the most in my experience in real estate. You hear people, real estate investors, talk a lot about, how important cash flow is. So, I mean, if you're living, you're probably having expenses, food, gas, rent, mortgage. And so, your cash flow is what pays those bills every month. If you're waiting until you're 59 and a half for your IRA to be able to get access to that, what are you going to do when you're 40 or 30 or 25? Like, that money you can't really touch without some major penalties. So cash flow, the typical way we do that is we get a job. Some of us get lucky enough to develop a business or something or get an inheritance, but cash flow is definitely important.
Yeah, hearing you talk about that, it's fun having this conversation with you in particular because you see both sides of the coin. You've had jobs, but you're also one of us. You're also a fellow entrepreneur. With that in mind, obviously we all know that entrepreneurship presents its own long-term investment, retirement challenges. For example, most entrepreneurs don't have somebody else who's paying into their 401k as part of a matching program. And so there's all these things that we miss out on when we're not W-2 employees for somebody else. What are those special considerations that you would invite other entrepreneurs to lean into that they probably feel disadvantaged about when it compares to having a job?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just speak to my own experience with this whole situation because when I first started as a financial advisor, I was pure commission, so I did not have any salary. They've kind of changed things up a bit today. So that was really difficult. And actually, the way for me to make it work is I had to find a new person to work with where I did have some type of salary where I was kind of had that, and then I could grow on top of that with my own income. But in my experience, when I got back into business stuff and entrepreneurship, which I would say I've kind of veered more towards freelancing. And I think that would be something that I would say that sometimes entrepreneurship, that word gets overused. There's a lot of people that they call themselves entrepreneurs, but they're really freelancers or a small business. That might be fun to talk about more, but yeah, when the pressure's all on you to make money, from my experience, I'm at the point now where I like doing that gradually. So the way I've done that over the last few years is I've continued to work part-time in education as I've built something on the side, and that's been growing gradually. And then of course when I worked as a financial advisor, it was kind of like baptism by fire type thing because that was hard. From day one, I did not have any cash flow, speaking of cash flow. So I've just had a lot more fun doing it where I can, I had a full-time job, went back to part-time, and then creating this stuff, and then we'll see where that goes.
Yeah, Nicholas, talking about a diversified portfolio now and some diversified revenue streams. I want to go there with you because I totally agree with you. I actually struggle. Obviously, I started this podcast way back in 2016, so almost a decade ago now. And back then, being an entrepreneur was more of a thing, more so than just anybody and everybody throwing it into their Instagram bio. And now everybody's an entrepreneur, especially during the pandemic. We saw everyone become an entrepreneur. Everybody became a podcaster. But I love the fact that you called that out. I even struggle to identify with entrepreneur these days because I feel like I've stepped into the executive role where I actually feel like a chief executive of my different business entities. Talk to us about those differences that you see. Freelancing, entrepreneur, business owner. I'd love to hear how you navigate those waters mentally.
Yeah, I love this question. And it's something that, I've thought about for years, but I'm going to give maybe a shout out or just kind of I was reminded of this by two people in particular. One was Seth Godin and the other one's Tim Ferriss. I'll start with Seth Godin. He just probably one of the most well-known marketing people in the world. And he created this company way back in the 90s that eventually Yahoo bought. And then he worked for Yahoo for a time. I think he was like some type of VP with Yahoo when they bought his company. And, so he experienced what it was like to be an entrepreneur, to kind of have all these employees. And then actually, some people's dream is like, you scaled so big that another company buys your company. And today he calls himself more of a freelancer, and he says that, he really does not like being an entrepreneur. He said that was just too stressful for him, all the people to manage, or you got to find a manager to manage all the people. And so I think I identify more with that. I have people that I've worked with or worked mostly, in my experience, they've just been more contractors that I've hired out. And I kind of prefer to be either like just me or, maybe having a few people on my team that work with like part-time, maybe one full-time person. So I would identify more as a freelancer. Now I do have this entrepreneurial element to what I've developed over the last few years in particular. And basically that's creating a brand. So I learned a lot about this when I started to, Money 101 Academy is one example. Like part of my goal in creating Money 101 Academy was something that was bigger than myself. And it's turned into something that's been a real gradual growth. So it's, in the beginning, I thought maybe it could scale pretty quickly, but I was intentional about making it something where it is bigger than me, where it is something that somebody else could eventually take over one day. And that's what an entrepreneur does. They create a brand that's bigger than themselves, that's bigger than their own personality, that can live on for decades or centuries beyond them.
Yeah, Nicholas, bonus points to you today for bringing in some Seth Godin knowledge. He's been one of the biggest influences. You're actually the first guest in over 1,100 episodes that has also referenced his work. He's been influential in my life and entrepreneurial journey for literally decades at this point. I always think about his tyranny of being picked. To me, that's one of the differentiators for entrepreneurs is that we don't wait for others to pick us. You just went out and you started Money 101 Academy on your own accord, and you get to make a difference. And so I really appreciate hearing how much his work has also factored in there. Picking on that theme of being a solopreneur, though, I know that you're not always alone in your endeavors. You mentioned some people who you outsource to and that you collaborate with and that you work with, but I'm also intrigued. I want to hear more about your work with masterminds and networking groups, because to me as an entrepreneur and an extreme extrovert, I'll enter that into the conversation, being around other people is so important for me. Now I'm very fortunate to have amazing guests like you, but I want to hear more about your experience with masterminds and networking groups.
Yeah, I mean, the first networking group I did started, it was probably me and another person that mostly started it. This was probably back in 2006, maybe, when I was a financial advisor. And there was this, there probably still exists today. It's called BNI, Business Networking International. And the whole purpose of it is to just really get to know other people and kind of create a referral-based word of mouth business. it's a really powerful model, especially if you're in a service-based industry that, caters to local people, like, if you're a dentist or a doctor or a lawyer or a financial advisor or an accountant. And I've kind of just continued to like either find groups like that or create them. Currently, I have a few that I'm a part of. There's one that we started back in like 2020. No, it's been in several years. And then there's one particular to real estate that I'm in. And I think it just helps to, like, I'm a believer that if you want to be successful in business, it's helpful to have somebody that's like 10 years ahead of you or 20 years ahead of you, people that are at the same level, and then people that are like maybe a few years behind you. And I've just found that to be the most enriching experience. So in masterminds, sometimes you encounter all three of those. People at all different levels. It tends to be more people like on the same level as me. And then, but yeah, it makes it more fun, especially as an entrepreneur or as a freelancer. You're kind of, even if you have a lot of employees, it's still kind of like you're the one at the top. And being in a mastermind or having friends that are also business owners, it's kind of like having, other employees. Like, it's kind of a way they understand what it's like. They understand the challenges. And, then you're not alone. You have people to work with. You don't have to be in the same company to team up with people and to partner with people. You might be at completely different companies, and those people might be the most help to you, even though they're not on the payroll.
Yeah, Nicholas, I feel like you just gave a $80,000 a year tip right there, dropping BNI. For me personally, BNI was my biggest single revenue stream when I joined it all the way back in 2012 when I had my marketing and search engine optimization agency. I think that year it was $80,000 in revenue that we did just from BNI. So listeners, Nicholas is just not holding back. This is a real life group that probably does exist in your area and probably does, unfortunately, meet at 7 o'clock in the morning every single week. However, with that said, it's an example of a networking group that actually works. And so, Nicholas, I'm going to push you a little bit more there because that's what fascinates me about BNI. To me, it's so differentiated from the Chamber of Commerce, because the Chamber of Commerce is great if you want to be surrounded by people, but BNI is tangible, tactical, and strategic business growth from people from all different industries. One of my biggest referrers was the local plumber. And who would have thought about partnering up between a search engine optimization agency and a plumber and then a realtor, and all of these things coexist. And that's what Embraces, one of our show's principles: a rising tide lifts all boats. So, Nicholas, I'm going to lump this in with your masterminds that actually work, because a lot of people probably haven't experienced a mastermind format. What do those actually look like? What makes them actually work instead of just the informal Chamber of Commerce events where people come and go once a month and never do anything with it?
Yeah, I mean, these things might informally happen in your life organically if you're around other business owners. But the structure that I tend to run across is you begin with, you kind of give everybody a chance to share, and you might share like a success that you've had recently, a challenge you're facing, over the past month, and something you want to accomplish before we next meet in a month. Something like that, where you're kind of able to, because sometimes you can get too bogged down about the challenges or forget about what's going well. And sometimes voicing those challenges, somebody else might have the same challenge, or they might have some good advice. So that's kind of the typical structure. I mean, there's all kinds of other variations of it, but that seems to be the heart of it, where you're really just sharing what's really happening in your business and not forgetting what's going well.
Yeah, really well said, Nicholas. I want to get some insights here because I knew time would fly by, but there's still a few topics that I want to touch on. One of which is, it's so clear to me that you love just trying new things, and the fact that you're throwing YouTube shorts out there for Money 101 Academy, I would argue that it's especially time relevant right now as we go through some interesting economic times. But what's the YouTube shorts game been like for you, Nicholas? Because I feel like that's kind of one of the next frontiers, and actually I'd argue it's very much already here, but it's one of those hot frontiers with regards to content and distribution and audience. So what's that been like?
Yeah, I mean, YouTube Shorts, it's been, so the Money 101 Academy business, there is a YouTube channel. And the shorts has been one part of it. I've just had fun creating like financial, personal finance content that's entertaining, but also where you're learning something new. I've kind of toyed with the idea of just making that what I would focus on. But yeah, I mean, the other passion I would say is writing. So I do a newsletter with Money 101 Academy, some blogging I've been doing, and I have my own blog where I'll just write about, well, I think you had said it, life, business, and creativity. There was a coach I worked with a few years ago, and that was one of the things that kind of came out of our meetings was like, you got to niche down to be able to find a way to serve people in a business. But there was this broader theme that was coming out that I just like creating content that is helpful to people, but it goes beyond just business. And that's why I started that blog. It started as a squeezelemon.com, and then I just changed it over to nickcook.blog. But that's been kind of a passion project that just allows me to write about things that, observations I've made or different things like that. So.
Yeah, Nicholas, I love hearing about all these different facets of not only what you do, but the passions that drive those things. Obviously, writing is so near and dear to your heart. Part of me, what I really admire about all of this, Nicholas, is the fact that you're doing these projects because you want to. Literally, they're not tied to something that you're saying, oh gosh, I hope this blog really takes off and I get 100,000 people on my email list. You're not doing it for those reasons. And part of me wonders, where's that mindset and that patience and that just consistency and discipline come from? Is it where you feel secure thanks to the foundation that you've built and that allows you to do these other things? Or chicken and the egg? Is it the other way around? I'd love to hear where that comes from.
Yeah, I think one place it comes from, it's kind of an interesting story. This was probably 5 years ago or so. I was going back to school to get a graduate degree, to get my teacher certification. And a lot of it was online. And I found myself sometimes like there was an assignment to create a blog, to convince somebody, to persuade somebody of something. And I noticed over time, like, part of getting this degree was just doing projects. And part of being a teacher was just doing projects. I would put together, okay, we're going to go through how to save and invest in a personal finance class. And there was a project of how I would put together things that would make the content engaging, but there would still be substance there. And I guess I figured out, or I just thought at the time, during COVID, like, because I was actually working from home as a teacher, and I was like, why don't I just create projects on my own? Like, what's stopping me from just doing basically what I'm doing now and putting it on a website or putting it on a YouTube channel? And I started to hear other people talk about, like, people that were way ahead of me, like Seth Godin. He would say, like, his job, what he does for work is he just does projects. It's kind of funny, like, because he's, his first company that he sold, it sold for like $30 million to Yahoo, and here he is saying that's all he does is he just does projects. And it's true when you think about it, especially if you have like if you're kind of a very tight ship company, like you're just, your project might be writing new blogs, it might be, interviewing people. And, that's the way I've looked at it. It's, fortunately, it's been gradually growing over time.
Yeah, I like hearing that mindset, because also where my head goes, hearing you talk about that and seeing how it's manifested itself in your work, is it really embodies that essence of this too shall pass. When we accept that everything we do is just a project, then we sort of lose the attachment to that outcome that we're hoping for. And we know that it's just one step of many, and none of them are going to be our final project. We're just going to keep doing one thing to the next. And I love that. Taking us back to the pandemic, it's cool hearing that Nicholas Cook at the the time was teaching from home because obviously of the pandemic, but also launching these projects. I'd love to hear your take because we hear all sorts of conflicting advice about burn the ships and have no plan B. But obviously a lot of people, myself included, do start their business while they're working at a job. What's your take on that, especially with your financial planning hat on as well, Nicholas?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of talked about this a little bit earlier. I'm just at a place in my life where I don't, I'm much slower to burn the ships. I kind of, maybe it was just it was a really hard experience. Like your first job out of college, you're working straight commission. And there was a lot of good that came out of it, a lot of really good experiences that I learned a lot about business and how to treat people right. And how to grow a business, but it was just I'm of the where I'm at. I'm of the mindset of just gradually working there. I think you kind of, my opinion is you kind of do good for your customers that way because you're not motivated by money. You're motivated, and the money will follow if you're serving them and you pick the right company with the right market. But if you're just concerned about making money, then there's pressure to do stuff that is not the best for your customers. And I don't like being in that position.
Yeah, Nicholas, I don't usually put guests on the spot in this way, but I trust that you're going to have something cool that you can pull from. And that is, it seems to me, hearing how much Seth Godin's work has impacted you, I very much echo those sentiments. And I would imagine that there are different books or maybe other thought leaders that you take inspiration from and that you've really learned from. I'd love to hear if it's a book or something else that has helped guide that entrepreneurial thinking or strategy or tactics or the way that you operate in your businesses.
Yeah, so there is a book that this was a long time ago. This was back when I was a financial advisor. What is that book called? It's a classic book.
I'm cheating because I've got some notes. Yeah.
how to win friends and influence people. Just a classic book. If you're in business, I think it's worth reading, but it really just trained me to put yourself in your customer's shoes. Like, what do you really want from a business? Like, to put yourself in your customer's shoes. That was the biggest takeaway from that book. But the first thing that came to mind is to put yourself in situations where, especially if you can be around people that are where you want to be. And probably one of the wisest, I don't know if I want to use the word wise, but it was a smart decision in hindsight, I think, so far, was finding like an office to work at with entrepreneurs. And I can just remember like crossing paths, and even now to this day, with people that they've built and sold off 2 companies or 3 companies even. And it's just kind of in the air when you're around people. It's kind of like the mastermind thing. When you're around people that are doing things that you want to do, it's like Silicon Valley. It becomes kind of like in the air. You begin to breathe it, and it becomes kind of normal. Like, you just had this conversation with somebody who's, it's not a big deal that they're making $10 million a year, or maybe even like hundreds of millions of dollars a year. I think being around people and not to say that these people are perfect or anything, but they figured something out. And when you're around these people, you start to kind of see like, hey, like they're kind of normal like me, like, or weird like me. So I could do this too.
Yeah, so well said. You really take me back to one of my favorite books of all time is The Magic of Thinking Big by Dr. David J. Schwartz. And in that book, he says, you can tell how big someone thinks by if they laugh at your big ideas. And he says, tell someone who's made $1 billion in their life that you really want to make $1 million, and they'll say, yeah, sure, go do it. But tell somebody who's never seen more than $100 in their bank account the exact same thing, and they're going to think it's a crazy idea. And so I love the fact that it's such a common thread through everything you you do, Nicholas, is surrounding yourself with people who are thinking big, who are doing good in the world, and who are pursuing their passions and their hobbies and things that make the world a better place. So huge kudos to you. I always love asking this question at the end of every episode. It's super broad, so you can take it in any direction you want, and that is, what's your best piece of advice for listeners? Knowing that we're being listened to by both entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs at all different stages of their own growth journeys, and knowing that you are one of us, Nicholas. You're a fellow entrepreneur, no matter which label you want to subscribe to. What's that one piece of advice that you want to leave them with today?
I think really, I would say just try to have a vision of where you want to go. Like whether it's creating a vision board or just taking time to really think about like what's really important to you in life. I think that's going to give purpose to what your decisions you're going to make towards, being an entrepreneur or being a freelancer or maybe doing none of the above. It'll help you be flexible. If you're, one of my mistakes was I was too specific about what I wanted to do. And when I took a step back, it was a little bit more broader about my vision. It became easier that way. And that's what I would say is to try to really have a vision of what, and it might have nothing to do with business. It might be that you just want more free time. You want to spend more time with family. It might be that you want to take more vacations or you want a bigger house or whatever. But I think if you have this real vision in mind of where you want to go, it'll make it easier when you show up to do the work.
Yes, so well said. I love the fact that advice transcends just business, because I always argue that business is just a microcosm of life. Everything's just a microcosm of life and everything else. So I love that advice for our listeners, Nicholas. I also think it's a perfect segue because you've got a few links to invite listeners to check out, because obviously you do so many cool things, both personal wise and also career and business wise. So drop those links on us. Where should listeners go from here?
Yeah, probably the main one would be just to check out my blog, nickcook.blog, nickcook.blog. If you go over to money101academy.com, there's a free newsletter, and it's not spam, so I only really send it when I have something worthwhile to share. So it might be once a month, it might be once every 6 months, it might be once a week. It just depends on when I get inspired to share something useful. And there's the YouTube channel over there as well.
Yes.
And just feel free to reach out to me. I love meeting new people and, seeing if there can be some way we can help each other.
Heck yes. I love that attitude and that mindset. I've not heard anyone say that publication schedule of their newsletter, but that is very cool, Nicholas. Not just to send it out just because it's, Friday afternoon and it's time to send a newsletter out. So kudos to you in the way that you operate and how generous you are in sharing all of these things. Listeners, you already know the drill. We're dropping those links down below in the show notes, no matter where it is that you're tuning into today's episode. Otherwise, Nicholas, on behalf of myself and all the listeners worldwide, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Yeah, thanks, Brian, for reaching out and inviting me to the show.